The cry of angst was so intense that even my goddamn hair hurt. My skin felt like 1,000 pinpricks of sharp pain. I tried to open one eye, but the painful brilliance of a supernova pierced through my brain, slamming into the back of my skull with all the delicacy of a semi-truck loaded with steel girders and plate glass, driven by Ted Nent, a really pissed-off Ted Nent, probably a drunk Ted Nent. There was a horrible screeching sound slowly building, kind of like cat nails on a chalkboard. Sweet Jesus, save me, or Buddha or Shiva or anyone out there. Cthulhu, anyone? I felt myself heave and retch, but there was obviously nothing left in me to come out. The horrific screeching was slowly coalescing into something. Well, if it wasn't coherent, at least it was recognizable as a human voice. I forced my eyes open against the pain and unsuccessfully tried to understand the blurry form looming over me. I crushed my eyes shut and then tried again. A pair of feet came into focus in the dry white dust in front of me, Barbie pink toenail polish and a pair of open-toed slippers that seemed to be made mostly of pink cotton candy. Okay, a woman's feet. Well, maybe Leonard over in Trailer 6 sometimes liked to feel pretty when he'd been drinking, but this probably wasn't him. The feet were too small by half, lactofungus, and the well-formed legs attached to them were missing both his mini-moles and his full-thigh tattoo of Rick Astley. The banshee voice started making sense after a fashion. I couldn't fully understand it because it was in Spanish, and what little Spanish I'd learned from Sesame Street in my delicate formative years did not include most of whatever was being said. I had picked up a larger vocabulary lately, but hell, I'd have had trouble following English at that blurring speed. It was probably best that way because if I was hearing things correctly, the last sentence that was blurred by it included the words for 32 donkeys and your 304 of a grandmother. I was guessing that probably wasn't an invitation to a Tupperware party, unless Tupperware parties had really changed since my mom had one when I was a kid. Concentrating, I realized I had to be lying on my side and probably in a trailer park. The dull white gravel dust was pretty unmistakable. At least I was near home, such as it was. I pushed myself to sit up and immediately began dry heaving from a combination of nausea and a headache that had to be among the greatest man-made disasters in history. The screeching snapped off, and those two delicate feet jumped back out of immediate splash range with a yelp. My nausea subsided, and I looked up only to realize that things had actually managed to get worse. Rosa Rafaela Rodriguez was glaring angrily at me from behind her oversized pink-framed sunglasses, clutching her nearly transparent pink robe closed with one hand while pointing accusingly at me with the other. Her chihuahua stood practically vibrating with fury just behind her, clearly poised to tear my throat out on command. Most everyone in the trailer park avoided Rosa. Leonard described her as the angriest woman on the planet. I'd been avoiding her like a religion since I first bumped into her at the mailboxes, and she'd reacted to my friendly greeting as if I'd attempted to kidnap her. In addition to handfuls of court notices for fees I didn't have the money for, lawyers' bills I couldn't pay, reminders to pay my parole supervision fees and final notices from utilities, some of which I wasn't even sure I'd ever had, I got both barrels from her. After realizing there was no possible way to break even, I just turned and walked away from her, which sent her spiraling to new heights of righteous fury. I still enjoyed the hell out of watching her whenever she was outside. She never seemed to wear anything other than that near-transparent pink robe, probably to drive every guy in the trailer park crazy. Still, her exhibitionist streak occasionally brightened my otherwise bleak existence in her mostly abandoned trailer park. She drew herself up to her full height of probably 5 feet and launched into me again. Ignoring her, I struggled to my feet, wavering a bit as I pushed some kind of umbrella off of me. She stopped suddenly, looked me over with a growing expression of disgust, and finally lapsed into English. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I looked down and realized I was standing in the rose bushes surrounding her trailer, which explained those pinpoints of agony. More disconcerting, I was also naked and apparently painted green, white, and red. This was just getting better and better. There had to be another half-dozen people standing in a loose, amused semicircle behind my tormentor. Leonard, happily sober or at least sober enough to be wearing overalls instead of a pair of, was standing behind her. Also behind her were Maisie, who vaguely resembled a much larger Danny DeVito in drag, along with Delbert and Tanai, who were wearing matching sweatsuits and had 5 o'clock shadows. All of them were staring at me. I snatched up the umbrella to shield myself, which sent the Chihuahua into a frenzy of spins and hysterical wheezing barks. Maybe it was because the umbrella was actually a comically oversized, brightly colored straw sombrero. "Oh, you scared my little Liam." Rosa reached down and snatched up the little dog. I shook my head to clear it, regretting it instantly. Ah, that hurt. Wait, Liam? Who names a Chihuahua Liam, for God's sake? She likes Liam Hemsworth because she thinks he's hot. Maisie volunteered, nodding and fanning herself dramatically with her hand, making her calico housecoat flap and wobble disturbingly. I like Chris Hemsworth myself, but I wouldn't kick him out of bed for eating cookies, if you know what I mean. She stopped for a second and gave a gap-toothed grin. They're pretty close, though. Maybe it's best to test drive them, maybe at the same time. Somewhere out there, I was sure both Liam and Chris Hemsworth shuddered and cringed in sudden fear for their sanity. I hoped they would never have a clue why. Rosa's sudden shriek of outrage wasn't entirely within human hearing range, but I cringed from the sound anyway, expecting the glass to shatter out of all the trailer windows. That would suck because that Alex kid who used to do all the maintenance had disappeared a while ago. He'd mostly played video games and whined about how boring his life was, but he could at least fix windows. I was pretty sure if she hadn't had the sunglasses on, I would have seen the whites all the way around her eyes as she leveled an accusing finger at me. "You think that's funny?" "God, no." I blinked, and I'm pretty damn sure Chris and Liam would be horrified by it. Maisie gave me a sharp huff and folded her arms over her chest, the size of a pro linebacker. "That's not what I meant." Rosa launched into another diatribe in Spanish. I judged it wasn't a history of the Spanish-speaking peoples of North America, unless there was some kind of historical theme involving my grandmother and 32 donkeys. It could be, though it seemed unlikely. I couldn't follow Spanish well enough to really understand what she was saying. Besides, it was starting to sound like she might be repeating herself. To be honest, her robe had fallen open when she picked up Liam, so I wasn't really absorbed in whatever it was she was saying anyway. She wasn't wearing a stitch under her slightly too small robe, and the Chihuahua was rapidly becoming my favorite dog ever by wildly pawing at her and pulling her robe even further open. Rosa was not only built with curves like the Monaco Grand Prix, but she was also very well groomed into a very pretty little heart shape. She caught herself, glanced down, then back up, looking me dead in the eye. "Hull. Hey, what are you, a third grader? Never seen a naked woman before." I was really getting tired of her attitude. "Not very many built like you, and I really love the heart." That seemed to take her off stride, and she snatched her robe closed. Much to my disappointment, I kept the sombrero in place. She glanced down at the crown of the sombrero, and I was sorely tempted to drop it to teach her a lesson, but I really didn't want to give Maisie any ideas. It probably wouldn't have actually fallen anyway. Rosa really was hot as hell. She realized I'd caught her looking and shifted uncomfortably. "You need to clean your vomit out of my rose bushes, hole." I looked down at the ground around me again. It looked like an entire squad of Marines had lost their dinner in her prize roses. Screw it. I probably owed her to clean it up, but I was really tired of her. "I'll get to it this afternoon." Rosa cocked her head in disbelief. "Yeah, right." I shrugged. "What can I say? You stole my heart. Just, keep it next to yours to keep it warm." I nodded pointedly to where the hot, dry wind was blowing the bottom of her robe open again. She tried to get her robe closed but managed to pop one luscious brown nipple loose. As she got that delicate, lovely heart covered again, she finally looked up at me. "What?" "Nothing. I'm just staying until the show is over." She gave a frustrated growl of annoyance, or maybe that was the Chihuahua. Then she stormed off, the friendly Santa Ana wind blowing her robe up to expose a perfectly delightful bare bum as she rounded the corner of her trailer and stormed back in. I stood there for a moment as most of the rest drifted off, leaving only Leonard, Maisie, and me. "That's quite a woman," Leonard muttered, scratching himself through the unbuttoned side opening of his overalls, exposing a band of delicate red lace across his hips. "So that up with a biscuit." Maisie rolled her eyes at Leonard. "For God's sake, Leonard, she's half your age." He grinned luridly. "Yeah, she is." "Pervert," Maisie said, shaking her head. Leonard nodded agreeably, still looking where Rosa had disappeared. "Hey, Maisie," I followed his gaze, but Rosa didn't come back out. Joseph, please tell me it's Sunday. It's Sunday? Then I'm not late for work. She shook her head and looked over at me, puzzled. What does Mexicano honorario mean anyway? Honorary Mexican, I replied. I looked down and could just make out letters written in black across my chest. Son of a witch, I'm going to kill Miguel. Dragging myself over to my trailer, I retrieved my key from under the lone flower pot in front of it. It wasn't a very good hiding place, but I had screwed up everything anyone would want to steal anyway. My living room furniture ensemble consisted of 2 folding lawn chairs, a thrift shop radio that sometimes worked, and a milk crate for an end table. I pulled on the cleanest pair of shorts I had, and then lugged several buckets of water over to Rosa's garden. I figured asking to use her hydrant would probably start another storm, and I wasn't ready for that. I spent the rest of the day fighting my hangover with drawn curtains, 4 or 5 gallons of water, and enough Tylenol to wonder if I was going to wake up alive on Monday. Hell, not waking up again would probably be a step up from where I was. I set the alarm on my dollar store watch and went to sleep. I dragged myself to the open gate long before the goddamn sun rose and watched Miguel grind the beater former school bus to a reluctant halt. Hey Jose, he said, grinning from ear to ear. It's Joseph, you a-hole. He grinned like a hyena. It's Jose now. We made you an honorary Mexican, remember? Yeah, I saw the label, a-hole. You didn't have to use a permanent marker. I don't remember much, but from the way I felt yesterday, I think the ceremony involved replacing all my blood with tequila. He nodded solemnly. Missed call, you a-hole. You didn't even get me home. Hey, you said you were fine. We dropped you off at the gate. You took the word of a naked drunk man. You weren't naked, you had a sombrero. He seemed very pleased with himself. I glared at him as I sat down in the seat behind him. I came to Rosa's garden. Is that a metaphor? Tell me that's a metaphor, 'cause I bet her garden is amazing. He shook his head and chuckled as we pulled away. I'd love to be your gardener, except she's my cousin and she has that whole piss that almond thing going on and would probably kill you. The next morning. Going on. It's not a metaphor. She has roses growing around her trailer, and I threw up all over them. Lucky you're alive, man. She's got a crazy-ass hot temper. Her ex-husband was screwing around on her with her sister-in-law. She beat the hell out of both of them. She's dangerous. That's kinda my point, Miguel. Why the hell did you do that to me? Hey, it's a position of honor. You're the first gringo crew boss we've had who doesn't act like we're going to steal everything in sight. Jesus, Miguel. We're harvesting tomatoes. What the hell are you going to steal? It's pronounced Jesus now that you're a Mexican, and he's sleeping in the back. We like that you have common sense. That ain't very common, you know. I might have been the designated crew boss, but Miguel ran everything. I just stayed out of the way and mostly picked tomatoes with everybody else. You know you could always be the crew boss. No way. I need you to take the blame in case one of these a-holes steals something. He repeated that in Spanish to the rest of the crew on the bus. They roared with laughter all the way to the fields. We weren't even 3 hours into the 14-hour day when the fish showed up. Well, Joseph, here we are. Just checking in on your sorry ass, making sure you made it to work. My parole officer smiled at me, his repulsive grouper-like features twisting into a grotesque parody of human emotion. Yeah, well, I'm here. Another miracle. Joseph, it won't last. You know what the difference between a parolee and an inmate is? He didn't wait for me to answer. It's just one little mess and you're a big mess. So it's just a matter of time. I'm meeting my parole conditions. I'm working, I'm clean, and I'm not involved in. You've had 3 jobs before this one. 6 months and 3 jobs. Now you're working with a bunch of wetbacks. He looked over at Miguel, who just looked back at him blankly, as if he didn't understand a word of English. Can't get any lower than this. You'll never make another 18 months. I glared at him. I lost those jobs because you screwed them up for me. They needed to know what kind of loser they'd hired. He looked around and gave a nasty sneer. Speaking of cleanliness, I think it's about time for a test again. He glanced at his watch. You have 2 hours to get to the test center and piss in a bottle. Seriously? I don't have a car and the test center is almost 2 hours away as it is. You know the deal. If you don't make it or you fail it, you're back inside. He gave a low, saw-like chuckle and headed for his car. Miguel walked up beside me and we watched him roll away. You sure you're not really Mexican, Jose? Pretty damn sure, unless Mom was banging the gardener. You might want to ask, just to be sure. Why? Because that man really wants to put you on the other side of a wall. He stared after the fish's car as it faded into the distance, leaving a trail of dust. Jesus, you're pronouncing it wrong again. Remember, you're Mexican now and he's in field 3. He looked back and waved one of his guys forward. Don't worry about getting to the test center. My cousin Alejandro here has a bus license. He'll get you there and back. I don't have the time to break in a new crew, boss. We made it to the test center with a good 15 minutes to spare. I had to pry my hands from the edges of the seat since I didn't know you could actually drift a bus in heavy traffic. On the way back, Alejandro was pretty chatty, which was great except that he couldn't speak English. My Spanish was still limited to mostly counting to 10, naming the colors and an assortment of obscenities I'd picked up over the last couple of months. So there really wasn't much overlap. When we broke for dinner, Miguel sat down next to me. Saturday night you started to tell me how you ended up here, but you passed out before you could explain how a big-shot stockbroker ends up picking tomatoes. I shrugged. Not that much to tell. I got caught up in an SEC investigation into the firm. I didn't think it had anything to do with me, so I wasn't worried. I showed up, was told to go home, and was locked out for the duration of the investigation. Turns out there was an account under a fake name doing a lot of insider trading. It was closed 2 days before the SEC latched onto us, and the money went somewhere offshore. I didn't do it. Hell, I didn't even know about the account, much less that I'd been given access to it. There were maybe 6 or 7 of us who had access, but I got blamed. They didn't have the evidence to prove I did it, at least not enough to take to trial, but they pulled my Series 7 license to trade. You ended up in jail, though. Yeah, while they were investigating, they searched my car and found enough cocaine to hand me over to the local police and charge me with possession with intent to distribute. It wasn't mine, but I couldn't prove it. And a clean piss test isn't really helpful if they bust you for dealing. They were trying to use it as leverage to get me to tell them where the missing money was. I guess it was a lot, even by our standards, tens of millions maybe, but I didn't know anything about it, so I didn't have anything to trade. I got 3 years. It was supposed to be in prison, but you know how overcrowded it is here. I ended up in the county, and only had to do 6 months before parole. First-time nonviolent offender. Are you sure you didn't take the money? If you got millions of dollars. I got a cousin, I said. Miguel raised an eyebrow in mock interest. If I had millions of dollars, you think I'd still be around here? Mexico's just 2 hours away. He shrugged. So where'd the drugs come from? For a while I was sure they'd been planted, but you get paranoid when everything goes to hell all at once like that, you know? Really though, I picked up high-end clients from the airport all the time. Gotta give them the personal touch, you know? Some of those trust fund babies and celebs couldn't make it all the way to the hotel without taking a hit. One of them could have left his in my car and never even remembered it. Bad luck. Once that starts rolling, it doesn't stop. Everything fell apart. My wife was humiliated. She kind of stuck with me until I was sentenced but dropped divorce papers on me as soon as I was in prison. Stripped our accounts, savings and CDs. The way it all came apart and how rough the trial was, I wasn't really even surprised. The whole thing put so much stress on everything. She didn't want to talk about it. She just wanted it over. What a witch. I shrugged. I wasn't totally numb to it, but I'd apparently fried enough brain cells with cheap tequila over the last several months to take the edge off. Time, distance, and alcohol. She works for the same company but over in corporate headquarters downtown. Honestly, she's lucky she didn't get fired just for being married to me. That job means a lot to her. She's busted her for years and losing it would really mess her up. I couldn't expect her to stay anchored to my sorry ass and end up living out of a cardboard box. He shook his head. True love conquers all, huh? True love doesn't pay the bills. So what were you pulling down? The two of us with bonuses almost $500,000 a year most of the time, sometimes more. Now you're barely over minimum wage. She took all that money? Well, it wasn't as much as you'd think. We thought we had all the time in the world. We were spending it damn near as fast as we made it, vacations in Bali, Cabo and the Seychelles, skiing in Aspen, jewelry, $10,000 a bottle champagne, lawyers for my defense. But yeah, she disappeared with everything we had left when she dropped the papers on me. Couldn't you find it? She's an accountant, so she was pretty thorough. They're pretty damn good at hiding money too. It'd take money, time and lawyers to dig that out, and I didn't have any of those. When I get my feet under me, maybe I can get it looked into and sued for my share. He shook his head sadly. I've seen your paycheck. It's going to be a long time. Against my better judgment, I let Miguel talk me into going to another bar when Saturday evening rolled around. You need to get out, Jose. Have some fun. Like last week? I had so much fun, I only remember wishing I could just die on Sunday. Even as I argued against it, I climbed into the back seat of the beaten-up brown Bonneville. 8 guys could fit in there as long as nobody worried about seatbelts. We're going to a different place this time. Someplace more fun. I thought you said that was your favorite bar. He grinned. They didn't really appreciate us enough. Did we get thrown out? He frowned and held his hands up. Maybe. Didn't you say your cousin owned that place? A distant cousin, he shrugged and shifted to a brilliant grin. Besides, this club is dancing. When he pulled his beater car to a halt in the parking lot, and I unfolded myself out of it, I gave him a sidelong glance. A salsa club? Isn't that Cuban? This place is loaded with very hot chicks wearing very little clothes. I'd come here if it was a waltz club. He squinted at me. You do know how to dance, don't you? Yes, I can do the paso and the waltz. The shock on his face was priceless. Seriously? Yes, but I can also tango, foxtrot, salsa and a dozen other styles. Beth and I used to hit the dance clubs like it was a religion. Thank God, I thought we were about to get thrown out again. I laughed. I'll buy your first beer, domestic. Yeah, I know. I've seen your paycheck. We had an absolute blast. There were at least 2 huge bachelorette parties and 3 final divorce parties in the club, which made for well over a 2-to-1 ratio of women to men. Most of the women were already in the feeling no pain stage before we ever got there. I'd been dragged out onto the floor by 2 divorcees, a maid of honor, 3 bridesmaids, and 1 mother of the bride who drunkenly copped a feel so fast I hadn't even managed to finish a drink. I finally managed to sit down, watching Miguel get dragged onto the floor by the voracious mother of the bride while holding my Modelo. I peered around the packed floor, which was more bare skin than a nudist colony. I settled my gaze on what Leonard would term a particularly full and toothsome behind-clad and skin-tight jeans. The woman was apparently talking with someone at a table and was bent deeply over, leaning on her elbows so she could hear them in the pandemonium. Every time she shifted, I felt my heart, among other things, shift with her. Damn, that was one fine bomb. I was still watching, entranced, when Miguel stumbled into the table and sat down next to me. You're a handful, he said. Yeah, she was a handful. That Cuber got a handful, she even got my zipper down. She mentioned she was divorced like 6 times. He paused and followed my gaze. Damn, that's fine. He broke into silence as the woman straightened up and looked right at us. Rosa's eyes narrowed and she started right for us. Miguel looked at me and held his hands up helplessly. Hey man, I just got here, he said loudly enough for Rosa to hear as she marched toward us. She must have heard, since she came right up to me, ignoring Miguel. What do you think you're staring at, you perverted creep? I was probably going to apologize, but just as I opened my mouth, a giggling woman in a toy bridal veil half fell into the table, heavily dragged by her maid of honor. I assumed it was her maid of honor because of the brilliant pink sash that read maid of honor, no waste of a college education here. The maid of honor grabbed my arm and pulled me up. She needs to dance with 5 more guys. I was dragged to my feet and gestured helplessly to Rosa. I'll be back. The bride was not as drunk as her bridesmaid and was obviously a little uncomfortable with the game, so I did my best to be a gentleman. I didn't actually make it back to the table for 3 more dances, intercepted and turned by the other bride, the other maid of honor, and what turned out to be a very pretty trans person who saved me from another round of defending myself from the cougar. At least the trans person wasn't like dancing with a horny octopus. I was trying to work my way back to the table without falling into the clutches of the drunk and handsy mother of the bride when a hand grabbed mine. I wearily stepped back onto the dance floor. "Were you ever coming back to your table?" Rosa glared at me as we started to dance, but it didn't really bother me all that much. For some reason, she didn't seem as pissed off as she had a few minutes ago. I tried. "I had a cold beer back there, but it's probably warm by now." "No, I drank it. I was waiting for you to come back and apologize." Any inclination I had to apologize disappeared. "If you didn't want everyone to stare at your bum, you wouldn't paint those jeans on, and you damn sure knew what you were showing off bending over that way." Rosa's lips tightened into a thin line and her eyes narrowed. "That wasn't for your benefit, pervert." I shrugged. I didn't see a reserve sign anywhere on it, and I looked pretty close. I expected her to go ballistic, but she pursed her lips and shook her head, a small chuckle escaping. "Miguel says you aren't as much of an a-hole as I thought. He said it was all his fault. They didn't actually tie me down and force me to drink." I paused, trying to remember. "At least I don't think they did, but he could have. Not painted me up and dropped me off naked." She smiled. "I didn't expect you to actually come back and clean up the vomit. I wish you'd told me dragging those buckets around with that hangover was awful." All in all, it was a pleasant dance with a very hot woman, and when the song finished I figured we maybe had a pretty decent truce, at least for now. I watched her walk back to her table. The view certainly hadn't gotten worse. She glanced back at me, probably to make sure I was watching. Then she gave a slight shake of her head, a slight smile, and mouthed the word pervert at me. I winked back, and she rolled her eyes before sitting down at her table. Miguel looked me over for injuries. "Looks like you got away alive." "She's your cousin?" "Yeah, she's my second cousin." "Well, thanks for putting in a good word for me. I kind of owed you that." I had to laugh at that. "You kind of did, a-hole." I managed to make it a whole week without any kind of mayhem that might have been a new record for me, at least lately. One call to my P.O., 6 solid days of work, and no hangover on 2 Sundays in a row. The no hangover thing was remarkably pleasant, and I was thinking of maybe trying to do that more often. For me, that almost qualified as life being good. So of course it couldn't last. We finished a field early, but not nearly early enough to get to the next block of fields, so we were heading back before sunset. "Hey Jose, isn't that your parole officer over there in that restaurant with the blonde woman?" "Yeah, that's..." I froze, unable to believe my eyes. "What the hell? That's my ex-wife." I leaned back over the seat to get a better look. Beth's blouse was unbuttoned an awful lot for a friendly lunch. "What the hell is she doing with that a-hole?" Miguel glanced over at me, and then went back to pushing the bus through traffic. "Hold on," he said, pulling to a stop. He yelled in blistering fast Spanish to the back of the bus, and a bearded guy stood up and pushed toward the front. Miguel popped the door and I started to get up. "No man, you stay here. Jesus, I need to know what the hell is going on." He grinned. "Exactly, but you're still pronouncing it wrong. This is Jesus and he knows what your parole officer looks like." He shrugged. "No promises, but we have a cousin who works here. Maybe we'll get lucky and find out what's up." I wanted to say it was probably a coincidence, but what were the odds of my high-octane ex-wife accidentally meeting my scumbag parole officer? I sighed. Maybe she's checking up on me or something. Miguel looked at me with one eyebrow raised. "Maybe, but I don't know, man.